The review session of City Planning Commission will come to order, and Madam Secretary, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a City Planning Commission review session. Today is March 2nd, 2015, and a quorum is present. First item on the agenda is a Manhattan non-ULURP action with respect to a proposed modification to an existing previously approved special use and bulk permit to facilitate a mixed-use building at 688 Broadway. And I'd like to ask Sylvia to come up to present. This is item number 1.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This private application by Downtown RE Holdings LLC requests modification to a previously approved special permits pursuant to sections 74-712A and 74-712B of the zoning resolution. The special permits approved by the City Planning Commission on February 19, 2014, modified the use and bulk regulations to facilitate the development of a 12-story mixed-use building at 688 Broadway. As shown on the area map, the project is located between Broadway and Lafayette Street, between Great Jones Street and West 4th Street. In an M15B zoning district, NoHo Historic District, Manhattan Community District 2. The board to your left is the previously approved building section, and the board on your right is the modified project. The previously approved special permit modified the use regulations to permit use group 2 residential use on the 2nd through 12th floors and use group 6 retail use below the level of second stories in the proposed building. The bulk special permit modified the height and setback regulations to allow the proposed building to rise without setback above the maximum permitted base height. Subsequent to the 2014 approval, the applicant reconsidered the internal organization of the dwelling units in response to market changes. The configuration of the building is therefore modified accordingly. LPC has reviewed and approved a modified design. The applicant now proposes the following modifications. Several of the dwelling units of the building are made smaller to create 2 additional units on the 6th and 7th floor, increasing the total number of residential units from 14 to 16. The 2 additional units are located on 2 floors. To accommodate such adjustment to the dwelling units, the center portion of the rear of the building is reconfigured by relocating floor area. By comparing the building sections from the previous approval and the modified project, we could see the floor area is taken from the 2nd story, hatched in green, to add to the, so floor area is taken from the 2nd story and added to the 6th through 11th stories, hatched in red. Most of the addition to the rear of the building has occurred on the 6th and 7th floors, where a portion of the floor plate has been expanded by about 13 feet, while the addition to the 8th through 11th floors expands the floor plate by about 2 feet. The building has also taken more mechanical deductions in general. Therefore, despite the increase in total gross floor area, there is no net increase in the building's zoning floor area. Also, since the proposed bulk change occurs in the center portion of the building, it does not block any neighboring lot line windows or abuts any adjacent buildings. The proposed modification also includes increasing the size of the cellar level to provide additional residential amenity space for occupants of the building. Overall, the proposed modification would result in a net decrease in total floor area from the approved 44,985 square feet to 44,853 square feet and an FAR of 4.98. The commercial floor area is decreased slightly while the residential floor area remains the same. The modification does not affect the previously granted bulk waivers or result in the need for any additional waivers. As the commission might recall, at the time of the previous approval, both the community board and borough president urged the applicant to continue working with the residents of the Silk Building. Since the 2014 approval, the applicant has been in continued discussion with the residents of the Silk Building. According to the applicant, they have reached a new agreement, and we will have more clarity by the time this application comes back to the commission after community board referral.
Thank you, Sylvia. Any questions? This defines a minor modification.
Yeah, I just have one.
Mr.
For clarification, when you seek to modify a previously granted special permit, is there any discretion or is there a threshold of modification that must be met before you come back to the commission, or is it we must determine the level of the modification, whether it's minimal or significant? You see my question?
I do. I think my understanding, and those of you who have been here a lot longer than I have may clarify this, but my understanding is that if it, as this one modestly does, pierces the building envelope of, that had been previously approved, it does come back here as a minor modification. And there may be other criteria as well, but as you can see, although I think there's a very modest reduction in overall floor area, it does marginally pierce the building envelope. But I think we'd all agree it's minor.
It's no dispute for me.
Okay, so this referred out to the community board for 45 days?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thanks, Sylvia. Sylvia also has our next item. We're on item number 2, page 111. It's actually a proposed modification to an existing special permit to facilitate a mixed-use development at 25 West Broadway, returning from community board review. We're on item number 2, page 111, post-community board review.
So this is the application coming back to the commission after the community board referral. The application was referred out to Manhattan Community Board 2 after the February 2nd review session. The community board issued a resolution recommending approval of this application with no conditions. A brief overview of the application. The applicant requests modification to a special permit that was approved by the commission in 2007 to modify the approved use in bulk for the proposed mixed-use development at 23 to 25 Worcester Street, which is the low-rise building on the east portion of the lot, and 325 to 329 West Broadway, which is the higher-rise mixed-use building. The site is split between M15A and M15B zoning district in Soho, Cast Iron Historic District, Manhattan Community District 2. Pursuant to Section 74711 of the zoning resolution, the previous special permit modified the use regulations to allow residential use in both buildings and to allow retail use on a portion of the ground floor and the cellar of the West Broadway building. It also modified the height and setback regulations and the rear yard regulations to allow the proposed bulk of the West Broadway building. As you might recall, the applicant proposes the following modifications. In terms of West Broadway building, this is the old building section, and the one on the left is the proposed modified project. The modification include relocating about 1,200 square feet of residential floor area from lower floors to the 10th floor, adjusting the location of mechanical space, and increasing the height of the building within the permitted envelope. At the time of the at the time of the referral, Commissioner Kenter asked a question about whether the mechanical space on and above 10th floor could be converted to residential space. The project architect confirmed that it's not feasible to do so. As shown on the site plan and also the roof level plan, the mechanical space is not fully enclosed and is open to the air. The modifications to the West Broadway building also include an addition of a mansard roof and redesigned facades consisting of cast aluminum frames. In addition, the elevation of the ground floor is raised and cellar is eliminated to comply with new floodplain regulations adopted after Hurricane Sandy. In terms of the Worcester Street building, the cellar would be enlarged to accommodate a fire pump room, relocated accessory gym, and a code-required water tank. In addition, there are also minor floor play adjustments in both buildings. In sum, there's no net increase in either commercial or residential floor area, and proposed modifications do not increase the degree of previously approved bulk waivers or result in the need of new waivers. Community Board 2 recommends approval of the application with 37 board members in favor and 1 abstention. No conditions are imposed.
Any questions, Sylvia? Okay, I will entertain an assent by show of hands to send an approval letter to the Department of Buildings. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Well, now on item number 3, page 169. It's a second proposed renewal to an existing special bulk permit to facilitate a mixed-use development at 20 West 40th Street. Now, our presenter is Ezra Moser. We're on item number 3, page 169, also post-community board referral.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As indicated, this is an application by 20 West 40th Bryant Park Owner LLC pursuant to Section 1143 for a second renewal of a previously granted special permit made pursuant to Section 74-711. The original special permit approved the development of a 32-story mixed-use hotel and residential building on a property located at 14 West 20th Street in Manhattan CD5. Substantial construction has not been undertaken yet, and CPC granted the original special permit on March 26, 2008, and granted a first renewal pursuant to Section 1143 on December 12, 2011, which expired December 12, 2014. The previous developer who obtained the original 74-711 special permit ran into recession-related financial difficulties shortly after being granted said special permit in 2008. The current developer obtained the property in late 2010. They sought the first renewal, which was required in 2011, shortly after they took title to the property. Since then, they have lined up partners, developed a construction plan, and most recently had to return to LPC to get changes to the building facade design approved. They require a second renewal to begin substantial construction, which is expected to commence this year. The application was referred to Manhattan Community Board 5, which elected not to review it. The development site is a 12,180 square foot interior lot with a 20-foot wide through-lot portion situated on a block bounded by 5th Avenue, West 40th Street, West 39th Street, and 6th Avenue. It's located directly south of Bryant Park, as well as the New York Public Library's Central Research Library. The surrounding area, as you can see, is predominantly commercial with a few pockets of light manufacturing uses. It is located on a split lot, predominantly in a C53 district within the Special Midtown District. And the tail portion is located within an M16, not within the Special Midtown District. It's part of a larger merged zoning lot, which includes a 10-story individually landmarked structure called the Knox Building, which is located on the corner of 5th Avenue and West 40th Street. As I may have indicated, the development site seen here is currently vacant in anticipation of construction. So the proposed development is an approximately 357-foot tall, 32-story building with approximately 186,000 square feet of floor area, 95,000 square feet of which would be hotel and 87,000 square feet of which would be residential. It is proposed to have approximately 57 dwelling units, all of which are condominiums. In order to facilitate the proposed development, CPC granted a modification of the following zoning resolution provisions in 2008. Modification to the daylight evaluation, alternative height and setback regulations of section 8127, the split lot bulk provisions of section 7702, the pedestrian circulation space requirements of section 8145, and the street wall continuity regulations of section 8143. These waivers facilitated design that was flush to the street line and more consistent with the existing streetscape on West 40th Street. The applicant has changed the cladding and facade design from the 2008 approved plans, but the massing is unaltered and within the approved envelope. This is the before, this is the after, and you can see the after depicted here in the renderings. This is the development site, and this is the development site at street level. Staff has determined that these changes substantially comply with the previous approval. So the applicant seeks a second renewal pursuant to section 1143, which permits the City Planning Commission to renew without public hearing the special permit to complete substantial construction for an additional 3 years from the original grant of the special permit, provided the Commission finds the facts upon which the special permit was granted have not substantially changed. And the original special permit was granted pursuant to section 74-711. Would you like me to reiterate the findings for that? Okay.
Not necessary. Any questions for Ezra? Ms. Efron?
Really just curiosity. Is
Yep.
the new design David Chipperfield or the old design David Chipperfield? Because this would be the first building that he's designed in New York.
Not aware. I will ask the applicant. The new design is. There we go.
Any other questions? Okay, by an assent of hands, I will entertain a motion to send this with our approval to the Department of Buildings. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Done.
Thank you.
Send it on its way. Okay.
Commissioners, let's now advance to item number 4, page 205, a Bronx pre-hearing application with respect to proposed urban development action area project designation, project approval, and special permit to facilitate 90 units of supportive housing in the Bronx. This is item number 4, page 205, and our presenter is Anita.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This application was submitted by HPD and Sobro. The application was certified on January 5th, and the application includes two actions. The first is the non-ULURP Urban Development Action Area designation, and the ULURP application action is the special permits pursuant to 74902, which is a special permit to allow the community facility FAR to be applied to a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations. The project site, outlined in red on the area map, is located in the Morrisania neighborhood of the Bronx in Community District 3. The site is located on the northeast corner of Washington Avenue and 164th Street, which is 1 block west of the 3rd Avenue commercial corridor. The zoning on the site is MX7, which is the Morrisania Special Mixed Use District. The site is partly vacant, and it has 3 single-family homes which are proposed to be demolished. The site is surrounded by a mix of users, including residential users and some industrial users, such as industrial or heavy commercial users, such as auto-related businesses. The proposed project will include an 8-story building with 94 units. The units will be supportive housing it's targeted towards a mixed population of low-income residents and residents with special needs. The development will be built up to 5.6 FAR. The building will have on-site supportive services. The service provider for the project is Urban Pathways. The project was heard by the Community Board 3. It held a public hearing on January 13th, and it issued a recommendation for approval with no conditions. The borough president also recommended approval of the project.
And I believe the borough president has also put some money into this
Yes,
project.
yes.
Questions for Vanita in advance of the hearing? Mr. Knuckles.
Thank you. The studio apartments, I think there are 57
Yes.
of them. Those would house the individuals with special needs,
Yes.
so-called special needs.
Yes.
Are those studio apartments distributed throughout the building, or are they concentrated in one?
They're mixed throughout the building.
They're mixed throughout of the building? Okay. Do you know, Vanita, what the screening process is? Looks like a very, very good project, but how do they determine and ultimately select the individuals with special
Right.
needs?
So the individuals will be referred by DHS. So they would have some sort of screening on that level. I had checked with them regarding this, and there isn't going to be. I don't believe there'll be a criminal background check, but there will be just referral, a determination that they qualify based upon their income and their status as a homeless individual, and these are targeted towards individuals with mental illnesses. So they would try to determine that the individual meets those criteria. I can look at it. I can discuss this further with them, but I believe there's not a criminal background check that's performed.
Who will be here to testify on Wednesday?
There'll be HPD and the service provider, a representative from Urban Pathways as well.
Yeah, good.
So presumably Urban Pathways
They should be able to answer.
will
Yeah.
also be screening, I would think, wouldn't they? Ms. Young.
Will someone tomorrow be able to speak to sort of the design aspects of this project as well, or?
I believe so,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if it's the architect, but I believe Sobro would be there.
So, yeah.
So they
Well,
would be-
so, I mean, I will probably, I would appreciate hearing about the sustainable features, particularly
Sure.
on the energy use end of things.
Okay.
So I'm sure that they have a lot of other features and what have you, and that's great. But if they could also bring some of their energy metrics with them, that would
Sure.
be great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Vanita? Okay. Hearing on Wednesday.
Thanks, Vanita. Let's now move to item number 5, page 229. It's also a Bronx pre-hearing application with respect to proposed acquisition of property, urban development action area project designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property to facilitate 60 units of affordable housing. We're on item number 5, page 229. Our presenter is Manny, back from Community Board and Borough President Review.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. This project is coming back from the Community Board and Borough President for pre-hearing review. It was certified December 15 of last year, and as most of you will recall, this is the one where you had two different vehicles of disposition. One was the accelerated UDAP process, which was needed in order to have emergency rehabilitation for construction of low and moderate income housing. 14 buildings, approximately 900 units in the West Concourse section of Bronx Community District number 4. The Walton Avenue, bounded by Mount Eden Avenue on the north, Townsend Avenue on the east, and you have East 172nd Street. And on this block alone, 7 of these buildings were the ones that were being rehabilitated. Now, the site itself, the triangular site here, is approximately 9,200 square feet, and it is used as a parking lot for the sponsor, which is Settlement Housing Fund. However, it is underutilized, and now the Settlement Housing Fund wants to come back and do housing on the site, okay? So they have to go through the ULURP process in order to have a building which is between 9 and 11 stories, 60 dwelling units, and this will be for homeless and low-income families. Now, the Community Board, for their recommendation, and I didn't note it on the briefing sheet with an asterisk, they approved the acquisition of city-owned property without any conditions. However, the UDAP designation project approval and disposition, they had approval with modifications. Now, the modifications that they added to the recommendation is that the sponsor, which is Settlement Housing Fund, and also the Briarwood organization, which is affiliated with them, they provide 50% of construction and operating jobs related to this project to minorities, females, and community residents within the borough of the Bronx. And also that they will report a report of actual hiring for the project to Community Board number 4. Also, they would like Settlement Housing Fund to provide contracting opportunities for the same group, which is the local minority and women enterprise. And the last one is that Settlement Housing Fund and its contractors shall make an extensive outreach to actively solicit and maximize qualified local minority and women business enterprise participations as consultants, prime contractors, suppliers, and vendors throughout all phases of the development of this project. Now, that was the recommendation of the Community Board. The Borough President issued a straight approval, and he does applaud Community Board number 4 for their modifications to one of the actions. Now, the project, as you may recall, is the construction of a 9 to 11-story building on this 9,200 square foot lot. And one of the questions that arose at the last time, I believe it was Commissioner Cantor, had asked about the elevator, if it was, the elevator bulkhead, if 2 elevators were sufficient because of the activity on the rooftop terrace. And HPD will be here for the public hearing and will have an answer for you on that. Also, Commissioner Marin had asked about the apartment distribution and the percentage of homeless versus low-income families, and that's in your briefing package. Are there any questions?
Mr. Cantor.
Yeah, thank you. Manny, a couple of years ago, we had a situation with a developer who was developing low-income housing in the Bronx and had done some patently questionable alterations to the FARs. Is anyone, do we know if anybody related to that application back then has anything to do with this?
No, I have no idea. If I can do some research on that and get back to you with an answer.
Yeah. But this hasn't gone through DOB yet, no?
Excuse me?
No, this has not gone through DOB review.
No.
But presumably through an HPD review. Ms. Delausse.
Hi, Manny, I'm just wondering, should we
Okay.
expect someone from Settlement or Briarwood to be able to speak to the community board's recommendations? on modifications?
Yes, they will have a representative here for the public hearing.
And they'll be able to speak to the community board for us?
Well, I don't know but I'll call HPD and just have them contact them and to be prepared.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Manny? Okay, thank you, Manny.
Okay, thank you.
Let's now move to item number 6, page 247, is the Queensbury hearing application with respect to the proposed acquisition of property for continued use as the Charles R. Drew Early Learning Center and the Theodore Jackson Senior Center. Our presenter is Stephen. This is back from Community Board and Borough President Review. Item number 6, page 247.
Good afternoon, Chairman Weisbrod and Commissioners. This application, filed by the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, the Department for the Aging, and the Administration for Children's Services, seeks an acquisition for continued use of the existing Charles R. Drew Early Learning Center and the Theodore Jackson Senior Center, both located at 16515 Archer Avenue in Jamaica, Queens Community District 12. The site is improved with an existing 5-story building between 165th Street and Merrick Boulevard on the north side of Archer Avenue and can be easily reached by public transportation on the E, J, Z, and nearby F subway lines, as well as multiple bus lines which drop off passengers at Jamaica Center. The ACS Child Care Center occupies approximately 31,000 square feet of the second floor of the building, including 29,000 square feet of interior space and an enclosed rooftop play area. The senior center occupies approximately 22,513 square feet on the first floor of the building, with offices, a kitchen, dining room, and a computer room. The remainder of the building is occupied by other social service functions and is not subject to this application. The Administration for Children's Services and its predecessor agency, the Human Resources Administration, has operated a child care center at this facility since the early 1970s. The Early Learning Center serves up to 72 preschoolers who may attend the program from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and are taken to the facility by their parents. The daycare encompasses a variety of activities and programs geared towards the children's developmental capacities and social and cognitive emotional development functions to improve them. The Theodore Jackson Senior Center provides a wide range of nutritional and educational support services targeted primarily to those aged 60 and over, with increasing emphasis on the frail, elderly, and minority populations. It is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, and has an enrollment of about 2,000 people and serves approximately 200 breakfasts and lunches a day. It also provides social service application assistance and recreational and physical activities, improving social and cognitive health for the clientele. So again, to facilitate this project, the applicant seek an acquisition for continued use. This was certified on December 15th. The Community Board 12 held a land use committee on January 6th and a public hearing on the 21st, and by a vote of 36 in favor, 0 opposed, and 0 abstaining, recommended approval. The Borough President held a public hearing on February 5th and has also since recommended approval. Thank you.
Questions? Ms. Efron. I'm sorry.
2,000 seniors are enrolled and 200 regularly have breakfast and lunch. Is that a capacity issue for the center? Do they need a larger center, or is that fairly typical? Or if you don't know, will somebody from Department of Aging be here to talk about that?
Someone from the
Just
Department of
seems like
Aging
a
will be
very
here.
big disparity.
It's my understanding that it is typical, but someone from the Department of Aging can be here
Okay, great.
to answer that.
Ms. Levin, and then Ms. Delos.
Thank you, Stephen. The I have a question about building condition. The Queensborough president mentions in her recommendation that there was testimony that the landlord had agreed to make building improvements to keep the facility in good maintenance and appearance, and that was, I gather, a huge issue the last time this was up for renewal 20 years ago. Not on this application, but on the other similar applications, we've, I think, gotten more sophisticated about asking for information from the two agencies about the planned work that's required, the scope of work that the landlord's going to have to deal with in order to get the lease renewal, and I hope we can get some information about that during the hearing.
Yes, someone from DCAS who's involved in the license and lease agreement will be here. But this application, the conditions were good. I took all of these photographs and toured the site in November. The building seems to be in perfect working order. The particular recommendation or that point made by the borough president was based off of a voluntary description by the building owner at the community board land use committee meeting, who suggested she would be open to improving on an ongoing maintenance schedule, anything else in addition to the required components of this project.
Okay.
So again, it's in fine condition, but I believe the building owner will also be here Wednesday to address that.
But it'd be good if DCAS would bring the scope of work. We learned how to ask for that on a previous one in Harlem, so
Understood.
thank you.
Stephen, I'm sorry, Ms. Delos.
I was going to ask the exact same thing.
Stephen, has this building changed ownership since the last time it was approved?
Not to my knowledge. It's referred to as the Birkin building, so the current owner is Bonnie Birkin, the building's builder, his daughter. I don't believe it's changed ownership, but she can discuss that if it has at some point.
And when you toured the facility in November, you were accompanied by others?
Yes, the building owner and the agencies, yes.
The DIFTA and ACS?
Yes, yes.
And DCAS?
Yes, DCAS was there also. The architect from DCAS was there and will also be here Wednesday.
Okay. Any other questions for Stephen? Thanks, Stephen.
Let's now go to item number 7 and 8. In anticipation of a special meeting on March 30th, we will have our second post-hearing follow-up for Vanderbilt Corridor and for 1 Vanderbilt Avenue. And the record will note that Commissioner Cerullo is recused on these items. And our presenter is Frank. So we're on items number 7 and 8.
I do want to welcome Bomi back. Extended.
Thank you.
Can you all see? It's long, so we thought it would be better to not have the lights off entirely. Can you guys see it, actually, at this level of light?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
It's long, so we wanted to make sure that we didn't all fall asleep, including me. All right, so today for post-hearing number 2 on 1 Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt corridor, we'll do similarly to what we did last week, which is or 2 weeks ago, I guess. Start with some discussion of elements of the Vanderbilt corridor proposal, and then move to the 1 Vanderbilt proposal itself. And really, for the most part with this today, the discussion I think is about the proposed bonus FAR. And we'll go through kind of history, like the findings of the special permit and the proposal in relation to those. Before we get there, we wanted to do a couple things first. First, talking about permitted uses. As part of the proposal, the referred out text included a restriction on hotel development, conversion, or enlargement, except by a new special permit. And the intent of that was to ensure that that hotels in the Vanderbilt corridor are full-service facilities that support East Midtown as a business district. The commission heard testimony from the owner of the Roosevelt Hotel, and concerned that this would preclude their ability to enlarge the hotel even to the permitted as-of-right density. We understand that concern, and we believe, and staff recommends that we actually remove the restriction on the enlargements. This would still apply to new developments or conversions, but this would allow the Roosevelt to be able to develop to their permitted FAR.
What on each point, if you raise?
That's great.
Raise questions.
So just a question, so it's only, we were told it's only the Roosevelt Hotel that,
That's correct.
that's it, nothing
In the
else?
5-block
Right.
stretch here, the Roosevelt is the only hotel.
Got it.
So this would permit that.
Thank you.
And only for enlargements, not for, right,
That's correct.
not for the site.
Anything else? Okay, next. And just as a side note, we're going to spend a lot more time with these findings in about 5 minutes, but there's a couple of things that we wanted to talk about that came up at the hearing and came up in some of the borough president's recommendations about some additional language to include, particularly dealing with the proposed improvement types and the findings that exist in the special permit for those. Number one, the borough president suggested that we make clear that the bonus itself is actually generated by the proposed improvements rather than the other elements of the proposal. And that was always the intent, and even one of the findings actually spoke about that. It's really about the public benefit derived from the improvements that really speaks to that point, but they wanted to make clear that in the future, people don't lose sight of that point. Second, and we'll go through the specifics of the findings for the above-grade improvements in a little bit, but there was while there's a lot of language for those above-grade improvement types, one of the things the borough president pointed out, there really was nothing specific that spoke to that the improvements themselves actually improved pedestrian circulation in the area, or kind of how they related to pedestrian circulation. And that, admittedly, is a fair point. I think it's just something that, in the drafting of it, we thought it was in there, but in reality, I think they made a fair point that it isn't, and so we would be adding in additional language to reflect that. And then finally, the on-site public improvement, above-grade public improvements has a requirement or a finding that the space is surrounded or includes currently retail uses. The borough president recommended that that be active uses under this idea that would help activate the space. We think that's fine because this is a finding, and this would allow the commission to determine what types of uses make sense for the space. So these are three kind of general changes to the findings, but as we go through this in relation to the 1 Vanderbilt project, we'll talk much more specifically about the findings themselves and the relation to the project. So we just wanted to hit these quickly so we know what we're doing as we go through the rest of this. Okay. Now we're going to jump to 1 Vanderbilt.
One second. Mr. Cantor.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Frank, if I might go back just a little bit.
Sure.
On the Roosevelt site,
Yeah.
could Roosevelt buy air from the people who are objecting to what's going on this application?
Yes.
They could?
Yes.
Okay. And they could still do that as an addition within the constraints that you just, well, to be treated as it existed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think they, as I understand it, they would need a special permit for the transfer of the air rights, but other than that, they would not need a new hotel special permit.
If they were to maintain the building and effectively create an enlargement of it, that would be,
And-
they would
and-
still have other special permits to get, that they would be required to get.
And just to make it clear, there'd be no, under the proposed modifications, there'd be no necessity or requirement that there be a transit improvement or a pedestrian improvement for that additional purchase of air rights under those circumstances.
Right, and one of the things, I guess I should make last year's proposal required a new development in total. It was actually all based on new construction. This is, the special permits that we have here today are permitted for enlargements in general. So the Roosevelt is a good example. If they wanted to conceivably build on top of their existing hotel building, they could do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, all right. So now we're going to talk about One Vanderbilt, and there's a few things that we wanted to talk about first in relation to the proposed transit hall and into the Vanderbilt Public Place proposal, and then we're going to get into the specifics of the overall proposed improvement package and how that relates to the findings for the special permit itself. So first of all, here's the entirety of the improvements. We'll get into these, but really we're talking about the number of on-site transit improvements, the on-site public space of the transit hall, the series of off-site improvements to the Lexington Grand Central Subway Lexington Avenue Grand Central Subway Station, as well as the off-site public space, really the improvement of Vanderbilt Avenue's public place. We're going to start with the transit hall. So the transit hall is the above-grade public space, enclosed public space located at the northeast corner of the lot. It allows access down into the Grand Central Terminal Complex, but provides public space and effectively waiting space for people using Grand Central Terminal. This is a rendering of it. A number of things were raised by the borough president, I think came up in some of the public hearing comments. And so the transit hall's design will be updated to include a series of points that the borough president asked for. A unisex bathroom below the hall itself, I guess in the B2 level of Grand Central. 2 connections between the hall here and the building lobby, which is just located here to the south. The original proposal did not have a door. This would allow access between this hall and the lobby, and that there be a minimum of 7 benches in the space. And those were the series of borough president requests, and those will be reflected in the updated drawings for the second project. Yeah.
Just,
Oh.
sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Quick question about the handicap access. That is outside of the hall and in, I just am having trouble placing
Sure,
it.
so here's 43rd Street, here's Vanderbilt. So once you get in these doors, you're in the transit hall space, and this is, within the space itself, there's the elevator that allows you to go actually effectively all the way down both to Grand Central's levels and Eastside Access's levels.
And will it be available to non-handicap users as well?
Yes, I believe
It's
the
just
idea
a-
is that it's
an elevator.
It's an elevator.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Levin.
Just to be clear, despite the fact that there's a solid line on the bottom of this drawing,
This is-
there will be a
Right.
door.
What I'm showing here is the drawing that we showed what we all saw when we first certified this proposal. I'm just kind of showing that this is.
Okay, and the second bullet says there's going to be a hole in that door.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the updated materials will reflect that.
And did we at some point see revised drawings that showed an entry directly onto the public plaza? Kind of where the word Vanderbilt is?
I can.
Or is that in the-
It's to the south, actually.
the
and That
south.
was the other thing I was going to note in a second, which is similarly one of the other requests that the borough president made, I'm just going to go back to this drawing for a second, is that in the southeast corner of the site, there be from the retail, which is located at that location, that there be an entrance fronting on Vanderbilt itself. That'll be included in the
That will be
updated
included.
materials.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, next. Vanderbilt Public Place. So this is the proposal by the applicant to improve the space of the public place into a public space. There were, I think, maybe 2 or 3 different issues that kind of were raised at the public hearing and also raised, I think, in some respects by the borough president. One is a question of since at the point today, the process by which the space would be designed, which is the DOT Plaza Program design process as well as PDC approval, what is the commission actually seeing that allows them to have a sense that something here will be similar and kind of high quality as the current renderings and proposals are showing for it? So as part of this, and this is a bit of a continuation, but just to give as an update to this, staff have been working with DOT under the concept that we could include as part of the application materials a series of design principles that would be reflected in the application that would then have to be held to as part of whatever that future design is. This is something, I mean, I think the types of things we're talking about are things that I think historically have always been notioned or been thought about as the space allowing for emergency access to be maintained if it needed to be. Consideration of the space as a high quality or containing high quality materials. At our next public or our review session, we'll go through the specifics of that, but that's generally the direction this is taking. The idea of this is this gives the commission a greater sense of the specifics of what would be proposed in the future. And that would then require a chair, let's call it a check-in at the time, once that actual public process is happening for the design to make sure that those things are in line. And then second, I think there was at least...
One second, Frank.
Oh, sure.
So Frank, that would go through the PDC as well, right?
That's correct.
Right.
So I think the idea is that at or
Public
around
Design
that...
Commission.
That's correct, yes. And then second, there were uncertainty, I guess would be probably the best way to put it, on the maintenance obligation of the space. There was some consideration of whether it was Grand Central Partnership or SL Green. The requirements will be that this is SL Green's maintenance obligation for the space, and that'll be included in their restrictive deck that'll live to the site.
Ms. Efron.
Sorry.
It's really helpful on the idea that there would be a check-in and a locus for the design, but the programming seems of equal concern because a sort of a dead alley would be contrary to the vitality
Sure.
of the entire redevelopment. How would the programming, what's the assurance that the programming will be designed and followed through for the life of the project?
For the actual space itself. I think that's something that we're admittedly trying to work with DOT on now to get a sense of what the specifics of that could be as part of design principles now that then get reflected in 2 or 3 years into the future. Does that...
It does. I mean, I'm aware of the DOT Plaza projects and others where they seem to have dealt with this issue as part of community input. So I'm just wondering if there are models that might work.
Yeah, do you mean, and just again, you mean event planning, right? Or the events that occur in the space? Is that
events that occur in the space? What the sort of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. program is, so that these don't become empty shells with very beautiful materials.
I think that will be discussed during the design and the planning process. I will note that unlike many open spaces, this is probably going to be the most highly pedestrianized space in the city of New York. And so there's, I think, a balance to be struck here to make sure that events don't become impediments to the free-flowing pedestrian traffic, because after all, one of the major goals is to open up the space for pedestrian traffic. So I can only say I've already gotten inquiries from people who are interested in programming the space, but I think we want to be very, very careful that we don't over-program the space in order to assure that one of our major goals is realized. Oh. Ms. Delos.
So to that end, actually, because I think it's a very important point considering the very unique location and the whole idea behind this being to improve pedestrian access. Should that be something that's reflected in our goals? That way, there's no question in the future as to what level of programming may or may not should be allowed?
I think that's a fair and valid point. And I think we will include that.
Yeah, I was imagining sort of the after hours and before hours as much as I think the pedestrian control is going to be the issue during business hours, but.
And emergency access.
Well, this is, again, Grand Central is open as a transportation hub, and trains are moving through that 24 hours a day, and commuter trains 19 hours a day or more. So I think I appreciate the suggestions and how we word this. I think we have to be very careful in how directive and specific we want to be. I think, on the one hand, I fully appreciate that we don't want this to be so-called dead space ever, and on the other hand, I think we want to be careful that we don't become overly directive so that events and programming become impediments to what we want to see. Ms. Ortiz.
Is the issue just simply the management of the space to ensure that, all these conflicting uses are properly tended to? And, and if that's the case, is there an assumption that the Grand Central Partnership will be taking the lead in doing that, as other bids do with public spaces within their districts?
Yeah,
Well, go ahead.
You can go first.
Well, I would say,
Probably better you go first.
From our perspective, we want to make it clear that the building owner is responsible for the space and maintaining it and managing it. And ultimately, that is the building owner's responsibility. My assumption, as with bids throughout the city, that there may well end up being some sort of an agreement between the building owner and the Grand Central Partnership to do some things and not other things, but or maybe delegate that responsibility to the Grand Central Partnership. But I think that is for them to work out, and from our perspective, I think it's essential that we make it clear that there is a responsible party here, and that ultimately is the building owner.
Right. And usually,
Can I follow up on that, though?
Sure.
I think the clarification that, the owner take on costs associated, however that's done, whether directly as a contribution or as a contribution in addition to what they contribute to the bid under their assessment, is important because, the assessment is intended to benefit all property owners within the district, and they benefit at a greater degree because this space is right in front of their building. And so, I did ask that question, what is their contribution? They were able to point to the capital contribution, but there's no discussion of an ongoing contribution in addition to their assessment. So if that's what you're saying, I'm in agreement with that, but I just want to clarify, is that?
Well, having spent some time being in this business, I'm very, very familiar with the necessity that bids have to serve the members of their district equitably, but if there is a specific additional burden on the bid, that usually is an additional compensation to the bid to embrace that. That's why I think it's so important for us to make it clear that the building owner here is responsible. And if the building owner ultimately negotiates something for the bid to do, or some element of its responsibility that the bid could be responsible for, I have every confidence that the bid will take care of itself and make sure that it has the means to do that. Ms. Levin and then Ms. Delausse.
Yeah, I think those are important measures for us to get pinned down. It strikes me that Times Square is a cautionary tale here. We had the application last year, maybe the year before, about expanding the area of the bid's responsibilities that ultimately I think was withdrawn because it was such a tangled and confused situation amongst various city agencies about who was in charge of what. And I think we have, although this is a much smaller public space, we have the same potential for overlapping jurisdictions by city agencies. I guess DOT will own it, and but then we just have to be sure that we have laid out the right roadmap to be able to have good control over programming here and not get in the kinds of conflicts that we've gotten into in Times Square.
Right, I think that's a lesson well learned, and again, that's one reason why here we want to make it very, very clear that ultimately DOT is responsible for the streets, and so they are the responsible city agency here, but in terms of a maintenance agreement and ultimately a management agreement, we want to make it very, very clear that the responsibility lies with the building owner, and how that's delegated, I'm sure, if it's delegated at all, and under what circumstances it might be delegated, would involve not only presumably an agreement between the building owner and a designee, but would require the Department of Transportation's involvement as well. So, Ms. Delausse, then Mr. Cantor.
So is my assumption correct that the maintenance obligation for SL Green would run concurrent to their use of the building basically in perpetuity?
I believe that's correct, yeah.
Mr. Cantor.
If someone wanted to do a, quote, Today Show, would they have to get a special permit, a license agreement or something? I'm thinking about the way up in Rockefeller Center, one block is closed off.
I think they'd have to get a street activity permit from DOT.
That's,
I mean, this
They couldn't
is,
just do it.
what?
They could not just do it.
No. And again, I mean, it goes to the issue of what kind of, and ultimately, what the design of the plaza is and what kind, we want to be careful here about impediments and events so that we don't lose sight of the fundamental goals of this public space.
Right. Yes, and on that point, just to give you a sense of the kind of discussions we're having with DOT, as Frank mentioned, there's comfort with establishing now design guidelines and overall purpose for Vanderbilt Plaza, and it would be along the lines of, that the design of the space would be high quality and permanent and something befitting, its location immediately next to Grand Central Terminal, major gateway to the city, and that this plaza must facilitate pedestrian movement in a way that's also helpful for Vision Zero mission. So again, the thrust of it, of this is again, overarching design principle and purpose of space. We won't have specifics on the amenities, and there won't be much specifics on events. I think that would be established at a later date. But again, just wanted to emphasize that there will be a high quality space here, a permanent space, and one that can serve as an important and safe gateway for pedestrians moving through.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to what Edith said, which is we all recognize this is a really important public place, one of the most highly visible places in the city of New York. So it's really incumbent on the city, on all of us, certainly on the applicant as well, to make sure that this space is as high quality as we possibly can make it. And while we recognize that DOT is the appropriate city agency to oversee this, it is a public space and publicly owned, DOT has been quite receptive in our staff's involvement in the design process. And so I'm really confident that it will achieve the quality standard that we all seek. So. Mr. Dweck.
Quick question on the emergency access. Do you envision the bollards being retractable and actual?
That would probably, if there are bollards, they would have to be retractable
Well,
or
The
removable.
renderings,
Yeah.
Got it. So you envision emergency vehicles actually rolling up on the?
That's correct. They would, yeah. That is the requirement of the emergency responders.
Thank
Okay?
Okay?
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the proposed bonus FAR. And we're going to walk through a number of different pieces here, both give a little bit of background to how special permits should be considered and how they're considered in the zoning resolution, looking at other special permits that we have in the zoning resolution as really a comparison to what we have for the public realm improvement bonus, and then really go specifically through the actual SL Green proposal in relation to those findings to weigh and really get a sense of how the commission is looking at this proposal in relation to those findings. And then try to think about it. There have been some other kind of thoughts that have come up or other ways to consider this. And though less important to the actual determination, there are ways that we can actually just consider to get a sense of the appropriate scale for improvements here. So let's start in the ZR. So the zoning resolution really begins when talking about special permits, the guidance that it gives and effectively the requirements for the commission come down to two provisions, 7401 and 7402, really which say that the commission may grant a special permit if the findings that the findings are a condition for the granting of that special permit. Further, in the further requirements, it states that for each finding and for the grant of a special permit, each specific finding has to be met. So this is for each and every piece of the proposal, you really have to, in the CPC report, really determine that these things are met. So that is true for subway bonuses, and we've done this historically. On page 16, we just have the two findings that relate in the subway bonus, really looking at general accessibility and improvements to that general accessibility, and then really to the ability of the improvements to actually affect and kind of make for a better overall environment in the station. And these have been, the commission's used these about 10 different times for improvement projects through them. Most recently,
Frank, quick question on the findings for the subway, the subway bonus. That determination is solely CPC's. We don't look to DOT or MTA for any guidance around that, or what's?
Similarly, in this, the commission, before the application kind of begins the public process, there's language which talks about the MTA effectively signing off on the design itself, which is similar in many respects to what the current public realm improvement bonus actually requires. But the commission is required to make the findings that these improvements merit the additional density that are permitted through the special permit itself. And just to give it an example, I think you're right. The most recent that you all have looked at was 15 Penn, where the number of improvements that were proposed for that project, the commission made these findings and said that proposal warranted, in that case, an additional 20% bonus. Okay. Next, another one just and again, these are sort of to give a sense of the scale here, but also in a kind of different light. The one that I think the commission most recently saw was part of the MSK proposal, where this was an addition to the general large-scale development special permit, which allowed for a floor area bonus for a public park improvement on an off-site location. And so at the MSK proposal, this was for the improvement to Andrew Haskell Green Park, Phase 2B, I believe. And the commission made these findings that the additional floor area in relation to the size of the proposed improvement was warranted. And that so again, similarly, this is a type of thing where there are a series of requirements in addition, a site plan to kind of help the commission determine the appropriate bonus, as well as information from the Department of Parks and Recreation, that the park improvement would not have occurred absent that proposal. All right, but again, it's really, in a sense of scale here, there really were two findings. The commission was able to make these to determine the 20% bonus. Then, and we're not going to actually ask you to read this at this font, but then we had the findings for this public realm improvement bonus. There are, I believe, approximately 750 words. I checked yesterday, but I forgot the number a little bit. But what we're going to do is actually walk through those. And a way to do that and really kind of help the commission through this is really it breaks down into three areas. The first findings really relate to the proposed improvements themselves and kind of help the commission determine the amount of bonus that is warranted based on the improvements. Then there are that the actual proposed building, how does it relate to the surrounding area? And the idea is that that actually allows the commission to determine it's not just a good series of improvements, that the overall proposal is in fact appropriate to the area. And so that reflects on the design of the ground floor level, building's overall massing, as well as sustainability features of the building. We've talked about some of those pieces earlier, but that's the kind of second chunk of findings as part of this proposal. And then finally, there are really three summary findings. The first is that the level of overall bulk and the uses on the site are appropriate. Second, and this one we'll actually talk about more specifically today, that the public benefit from the proposed improvements merits the amount of floor area. So really the determination of bonus really comes from this first group as well as this middle finding in the third section. And then really that all elements are really well integrated into the proposal. But those are, so even though it's 750 words, those are really the kind of outline that the text actually follows. So now we're actually going to go through this. So starting on page 20, these are for the findings for above grade on-site improvements. There are a number of words that make them up. I've just broken them down into a series of bullets. But what this relates to is, in this instance, as part of the SL Green proposal, is the transit hall itself. And so just to kind of putting up the old drawing of the transit hall just because it's the one that we've seen. But what I was thinking that we would do and just kind of walk through each and every moment of those findings to actually just kind of talk about how the proposal meets those. It doesn't have to be everything, but I think this is at least going to give, so we're not here till 7 o'clock at night, but that it at least gives a sense of really what this is talking about. One sec. Let's go back to this. Okay. So the proposed improvements, to the extent practicable, consist of a prominent space of generous proportion and quality design that is inviting to the public. And overall, when some of the materials that the commission that the applicant has provided show this space in relation to other similar types of spaces, the Bank of America space, and shows that the space at 4,000 square feet is actually quite generous in comparison to that space. The proposed space improves circulation for pedestrians and provides suitable amenities for the occupants. Here, this is the space that through the connections both of the stair as well as the elevator actually allow access to the entire Grand Central Terminal complex. It really integrates this space into that entire network, and then provides amenities. Those include seating, which is proposed. There is the location of the, I'll show it here, the timetable, as well as kind of general retail uses or kind of picking up of food resources in the site or in the space. 3, that it fronts upon a street or pedestrian circulation space in close proximity within view of an adjoining sidewalk. So as you can see, the space is really on the corner of 43rd and Vanderbilt, right at the sidewalk location and right at the location of Vanderbilt Public Plaza. Seems to achieve that. Provide or be...
Someone have questions? What? Go ahead, Frank.
Okay, sorry. Provide or be surrounded by retail uses. In this instance, the space itself would actually provide retail in the space, some sort of food service that would allow people who are in the space or coming in and out of the terminal to actually grab something before going wherever they're going. And then finally, be designed in a manner that combines the separate elements within such space into a cohesive and harmonious site plan, resulting in a high-quality public space. And I think in total, all of these elements seem to work together to create that public space, which really integrates the notion of a typical public space with the notion of how this connects to the below-grade Grand Central network. All right.
Okay. Commissioner Ortiz, then Commissioner Levin, then Commissioner Cannon.
Okay.
So if you could just refresh my memory, with respect to the entrance along Vanderbilt, it does seem like we're going to see a lot of activity along Vanderbilt, and that's precisely why that public space improvement is there. So what was the rationale for no entrance?
I think that given the access that's going to be, that the sidewalk is right here in a determination of do you put it right on this street or you put it on this, and given this design element, which is the glass ceiling or floor that actually connects, that it was more warranted to put at that location. Really, at the end of the day, most people are coming, and I'm just going to go back to some sort of site plan. Most people are really coming east-west, and so being able to capture those people instead of having them come around the corner into the space was really the intent.
I guess, certainly right now, most people are coming east-west, but the idea of creating this space, you're going to generate more pedestrian traffic going north-south. So, it seems to warrant, it does seem strange that there's no direct access and that you have to look around the corner. It's just something that came up today. I'm not sure why it didn't come up for me earlier.
Okay. I think this is, in a way, part of the intent here is to try to go through these and see if there are concerns or issues that get raised. So this is something that we will look to the applicant to get a better sense of and respond to.
Okay, Anna.
Yeah, I certainly share that concern, and if a door appeared there, I think it would be a good thing.
Okay.
And also, I think it's great that you're taking us through this in this step-by-step way. I mean,
you may not say that.
Ask me how I feel an hour, but no. But this is, I think, exactly what we have been searching for in figuring out how to deal with all of this. But this makes me realize that we're going to make a bunch of findings based on the design that's shown in front of us. How will that design then be embedded in the approved plans so that 20 years from now, when it's time to redo the space, we know what they have to prove up to? Is this like the revisions to the redesigns of some of the public plazas that we've seen?
I believe that would be the intent, right? That this would be that the design is reflected in the special permit drawings.
Okay, so this particular design will be approved, and when it wants to get changed, it has to go through a public process.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea is that this doesn't disappear and it's just an empty shell of a space.
They can move around whatever they want to move around, right?
Take the space and move it over.
Yeah. Okay, so it'll work like the public plaza in that
covered pedestrian spaces.
Codified way. It will, okay.
That's
good.
correct.
And then just for clarification, at the beginning you recommended a change in the text about saying that these spaces would be surrounded by active uses rather than retail. Is that the change? Right there, the second bullet up from the bottom? Yeah. Is retail?
We would change that.
That's changing to active. Okay, good.
Just trying to strike a balance between what we've seen in the past.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Cantor.
Frank, I had the same questions as the previous two commissioners. Excuse me, when we were working on Bear Stearns above 46th, I remember there was a determined effort to have a walkthrough, north-south walkthrough between the streets. And I was wondering, same thing the ladies were. It seems to me to be a wisdom to putting a door exit out there, because as buildings move in between going north, it will not only take pedestrian traffic, but in inclement weather, it will take pedestrian traffic.
Okay. I noted. Noted.
Okay.
Okay. Next, these are and really, I think one of the things that if you spend your time reading the zoning resolution, you would see that many of those findings for the above-grade on-site space really are reflective of what's in the covered pedestrian space special permit that we already have. And it's kind of similar language about the types of things, about active uses, access to the street. But because the permit actually combines all of them together, it includes somewhat similar language to them. Here, though, is one where we actually, this is a little bit of new territory for the zoning resolution, which are above-grade off-site improvements. And this really is speaking to things like Vanderbilt, for example. But the intent was that this would allow for even greater ideas of flexibility. If a project came with a proposal, we were trying to incorporate it, that it wasn't so specifically written for something like Vanderbilt. But in this instance, that is what the finding, that's what the proposal is including in relation to this finding. And the other thing I just want to make sure is clear, it's not required that every proposal that ever came for this improvement bonus had to meet every single one of these areas. If a proposal incorporated only below-grade improvements for whatever reason, that was okay. But the point is, because this proposal is including these elements, they have to make those findings. It's just also, just wanted to make that point clear.
Ms. Efron?
I have been wondering how this affects future applications. Are we setting either a precedent or a standard for which all others will be judged, or are you taking us through this so that we understand where this one matches up?
I think where this one matches up, and one of the things I think when we get to other ways to consider this proposal in relation to other things, I think history and what the commission has approved in other projects will definitely play a role in those future projects. But I think this one hits every one of the pieces that we're talking about, but it's not, there's nothing that requires that to happen.
In other words, we're not setting up a precondition where we would want, nor should an applicant try to achieve an open, a closed street in front of every aspect of this. Okay.
That's correct. That's really the idea here, is that there be flexibility in what one
Plus, it's
proposes.
not by any means clear that a future applicant would want or need a bonus of this size.
That's correct.
Or a future applicant might want to mix purchase of development rights from Grand Central and do smaller amount of bonus. So it's, each site will have to be judged differently, and I think the appeal of this approach is that it lends itself to a great deal of flexibility and an ability to look at every new application on its own merits, and B, does require that every single such application be looked at, and that it has to go through its own discretionary process. So, clearly we know that prior actions create some guidance for future actions, but given the variety of different ultimate approaches here and mechanisms and potential applications, it's a fairly flexible approach.
Okay. So I'm just going to walk through the findings for above-grade off-site improvements. It's like the Oscars. It's like the winner for best. So just to walk through these, that the proposal, to the extent practicable, will create street and sidewalk designs that improve circulation with comfortable places for walking and resting. And that really is the Vanderbilt proposal. This is really meant as a highly pedestrian space, and it seems to achieve generally that. Opportunities for planting and improvements to pedestrian safety. I think, and this is one of the points where the language of the kind of where practicable makes sense. This is the roof of Grand Central Terminal. Putting a tree in here would cause concern to the MTA greatly. But the overall proposal does actually propose, or would improve pedestrian safety, because it would actually provide a kind of easy access between the east side of Vanderbilt Avenue and the west. C, a better overall user experience of the above-grade pedestrian circulation network that supports the Grand Central Subdistrict as a high-density business district. I think one of the things that we've always realized about this area is that it generally, particularly this area right around the terminal, actually lacks for general public open space. And this would actually provide that for this area, and this becomes a resource not only for, let's say, the users of One Vanderbilt and Grand Central Terminal, but really for the entirety of the area. There's a fourth finding which talks about, and this was meant for conditions where the DOT design and planning process are happening at the same time as the commission, where the commission could waive that finding in relation to the DOT process. Given that the DOT process is happening in the future, this is something that's really not applicable here, and that's fine, right? But it was meant for a different type of timing, which is possible in other applications. Okay? Okay. Then we're going to go to the below grade. And the below grade is actually really, I think, speaking to the kind of complexity of the area, is really broken up into three types, and it's really similar in some respects to the subway bonus itself. One, that it provides significant and generous connections between the street level and the below grade level. Two is really dealing with how the overall proposal incorporates improvements to the below grade level itself. Does it make connections to various pieces? And then third, does it improve the overall environment of the subway station or the transportation network itself? These are kind of very similar to the subway bonus, but they're really, given this area has so much complexity, we tried to break them out into a more specific thing. And so we'll go through them actually separately, because I think in the scale of the Vanderbilt proposal, they're actually sort of warranted to do that. So first, significant and generous connections to the above-grade pedestrian network and surrounding streets, and connection to the below-grade pedestrian circulation network. There's a number of pieces where the One Vanderbilt proposal does that. On the site, it provides two new entrances, or two kind of brand new series of entrances to that below-grade network from street level at 42nd Street. It provides this mid-block entrance that includes escalators and stairs, really replacing a back door into an office lobby with an actual public entrance onto the site. And then at 43rd and Vanderbilt, it incorporates the entrance into the transit hall. On the subway station portion itself, the proposal includes one completely reconfigured and one brand new entrance at the corner of 42nd and Lex. The northwest corner is what is currently the Strawberry Stairs, replaced by a new wider stair and elevator, which provides greater access to the below-grade network, as well as the stair on the southeast corner, which basically allows people to not have to cross Lexington Avenue. So these really are kind of significant improvements to that in relation to that finding about connectivity between street level and the below-grade level. I'm going to jump in next to the below-grade connections, so I just wanted to see if there are anything. So here, improvements to public accessibility, below-grade pedestrian circulation network, and within subway stations and other transit facilities in and around Grand Central through the provision of new connections, additions to, or reconfiguration of existing connections. Again, we'll start on the Vanderbilt site itself, and the real element here is through the provision of this corridor which connects Grand Central Terminal, the transit hall, east side access, the subway system at 42nd Street with stair access up to 42nd Street itself. Really on the site is really the kind of main point of this, where it actually provides connectivity in a way that in the current Grand Central Terminal complex is really not possible without having to go all the way into the terminal to come back out. So this actually provides a major improvement. And actually the other thing, really providing accessibility from east side access all the way up to street level and to these various pieces, particularly the subway, really kind of helps the overall network by allowing people to not have to run through the terminal to get to the subway. So these are significant improvements on the site in relation to that finding. There's the proposed drawing of that. When there you can see the kind of glass ceiling that is reflective of the lobby and the transit hall itself. Then in the subway station, the proposal includes the reconfiguration in blue of the stairs at platform level that connect from the platform to the mezzanine. These are all of the stair narrowings that actually allow greater capacity at platform level, as well as the inclusion of 3 new stairs, P24, P25, and P16, or P10, sorry, at that go from platform level to street. And so these things actually kind of increase the capacity within the station itself. Here's the current framework where the stairs are actually quite large in relation to the width of the platform, making it quite difficult to move around, and so there's lots of bunching up. By actually narrowing the stair and providing the space around the columns, this actually allows for people to move better around the platform itself. And then at mezzanine level, just to give an example of this, the ability to actually provide these stairs from that mezzanine level, taking what is effectively the wall, the basement level of the Hyatt, and opening that space up and allowing people to access down into the platform, again, kind of provides greater connectivity in the station between the various pieces here. Okay? And then third, and this is kind of the significant advancements or enhancements to the environment of the station through what the variety of means incorporated into the text. I think there's a number of ways the proposal does this. One that perhaps is near and dear to me, so thought it was a useful one to highlight, is really on the mezzanine today is shown this pinkish area, which really blocks off the northern portion of the station from the southern portion of the station, so it's very difficult to actually know you can even walk between them. This is a view of that today, including the iconic mirrored columns, and the proposal in the future would actually empty that space out and actually allow for the access between this. So again, it kind of the overall station environment would be improved, and then particularly by the removal of the unnecessarily large mirrored columns actually allow for greater pedestrian space on the mezzanine. There's a number of other ways that the proposal incorporates daylight access and other elements like that, but this is one of the, I think, one of the core highlighted ones.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
Frank, I'm just wondering if it's a conscious choice. So when you look at the below-grade improvements and the language there related to proposed bonus FAR,
Sure.
the adjectives are used: significant and generous, major improvement, significant enhancement. But on the above, those are missing, and I'm just wondering if that's a conscious choice or if it's something we should pay more attention to, because it just kind of seems to be a higher threshold, if you will, for the below grade than for the above grade, as a result of the use of those words.
I mean, in the on-site, we talk about prominent spaces, generous proportions.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything, perhaps on the off-site,
That's
above grade.
That's what I mean, yeah. Off-site, above grade.
We'll take a
Yeah,
look
that's
at the
interesting.
language. I want to be very careful here because on the one hand, we do want these to be balanced because in this instance, the vast amount of resources are going into the below grade improvements. There may be other instances where a vast amount might be going into the above grade improvements and less going into the below grade improvements. So I think we just have to look at it really carefully so we maintain the flexibility and at the same time don't end up with, I think, your concern, which is that you can meet some sort of bonus standard by doing minor work above grade, but you couldn't do it by doing minor grade work below grade. So, but let's take,
We'll take a look. It's a fair point. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. Okay. So those are really the walking through of that first group of findings, the above grade and the below grade. But then I think the kind of other key finding here is in the, let's call it the third section, which is the kind of summary findings, and really particularly the second, which speaks specifically to the public benefit derived from the proposed above or below grade improvements to the pedestrian or mass transit circulation network, merits the amount of additional floor area being granted to the proposed development or enlargement pursuant to the special permit. And so I think this is the way that I think this is really considered is really what do you may have achieved the various other things, but what does the proposal in its entirety actually do, right? What are the actual benefits of this? And that actually, I think, looking at some of the applicant's materials and the other things have been said, what we tried to put here were a series of those things that actually are occurring through this proposal, at least in the broad highlight form. It provides significant benefits to Eastside Access users, or those who are trying to get to Eastside Access, particularly from 42nd Street and to the south. This would provide the southernmost entrance to it. And what that actually does is kind of allow for less kind of overall congestion in Grand Central Terminal itself. That's a major benefit here as part of the proposal. Second, really relieves congestion on the subway platforms, the connecting corridors, and the overall stairs serving the platform, serving the station here, and particularly the subway station. And interestingly, I think perhaps the most kind of key statistic here is that these improvements actually, in total, actually make significant changes to actual running of the line. Typically, and just looking back at the proposals of the past for the subway bonus, we get into things about, well, it helps the station itself and actually allows people to get up and down quicker. Not that these improvements actually allow the entirety of the line to run more effectively. That's a kind of different scale of improvement that's really ever come up as part of a subway bonus. And so the applicant's materials in the EIS demonstrate that peak rush hour, you're able to actually get an additional train into this station. And that actually is, on the scale of bonuses, we've never really seen anything like that. It's kind of a major change here. Fourth, it kind of generally improves wayfinding to the station and actually allows for greater access around the area between the above grade and below grade network. And then finally, it provides significant new public space on and off site. These are, in total, are significant improvements and really benefits that the proposal includes. And so, in relation to the actual specific improvements themselves, when you add them all up, this finding then allows the commission to make the sense of does it warrant and the permitted FAR or the requested FAR. Is that?
Mr. Cantor.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah.
This screen and the one before, could you go back to the previous
Sure.
slide for a moment, please?
I just went back to the previous one. Is this what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay.
The amount of additional floor area being granted to the proposed development enlargement pursuant to this special permit. These two screens have extraordinarily broad interpretations by whomever is making those interpretations. Is it proposed that there be a subcommittee or whatever it be called, or is it going to be the chair's discretion of this department? Where is this trading, because that's what it is, where is this trading going to be, or how is it going to be handled? It can't be a one-on-one situation, I would suspect.
Well, I think of it as it's you all.
It's ultimately ultimately, we all are the decision makers here, and we've had this discussion, the philosophical discussion about to what extent the commission should be directed. That is to say, that that we're here as fact finders to be simply to certify that certain very specific findings are being made, and to what extent should we as a commission be using our discretion and the broad general knowledge that each of us have and all of us have collectively to be making qualitative decisions regarding land use matters. And I think as a practical matter and as a philosophical matter and as a matter of what the Planning Commission was empowered by the charter to do, it's really a function of both. And so to some extent there are very, very specific findings and that we have to decide, and many times we are just deciding you know, has the applicant met these findings? And to some extent, we're expected, I think, as we are on many different things we do, including rezonings, broad area rezonings, including areas of major public policy, to exercise our collective wisdom. And I think here it's really a blend of the two.
Right. I mean, I think the commission's discretion through the variety of special permits and arguably authorizations that it has really come to the findings, right? And if there are things the commission has concerns about, that a project is not meeting finding X or whatever that finding is, that becomes a consideration for the commission in the grant of the permit or the grant of the bonus floor area that the proposal is seeking, right? So it really is that the meeting of those findings that is the core of the commission's job in relation to determining that floor area.
Ms. Efron.
I just want to say thank you, which is, I was having trouble with the word significant on the transit-related bonuses. Sure. And it really is clear, not just from the testimony which we heard, and the MTA saying that it's reducing travel time is a significant improvement, but the very detailed analysis you've given us makes me a lot more confident in the use of the word significant. I think this is going to be a high standard for future applicants, but this is a really strong and solid argument, so thank you.
Good.
Ms. Zella-Uz.
Frank, I'm just going to slide 45. I'm just wondering if it makes sense, because we spent so much time talking about the whole issue around maintenance of the public spaces, just to add and commit to, on the final bullet. Provide.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Provide
Yeah.
and maintain.
Yeah. Yes, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Let me just respond to one thing that Commissioner Efron said, and just from my former perspective, working in Lower Manhattan, I would say that the single biggest complaint that I would hear from businesses in Lower Manhattan, which had a large number of employees who lived either on the east side of Manhattan, Upper East Side of Manhattan, or in the northern suburbs, was the difficulty of the transfer from Metro North and the commute from 42nd Street to Lower Manhattan. And particular difficulty, not even more so in the evening rush than in the morning rush, because people could not time their commuter trains with any degree of accuracy, and so would leave themselves 45 minutes for a ride that usually would only take 20 minutes, but on occasion could take 45 minutes. So every night they would have to schedule 45 minutes. And as we heard particularly Jessica Lappin testify, that addition of additional one train per hour is a huge thing and a huge impact on commerce in the city generally, going way beyond simply congestion itself. And as Frank noted, it is the first time, as far as we know, that a particular improvement is not just having an impact on the amenities in a station and the pedestrian activity, but actually improving transit efficiency and commuter time, which is an enormous thing. So,
I think we wanted. It's clear that the findings are the way that the commission has to determine whether the proposed density or the proposed bonus FAR is warranted. There have been a number of other ways that have been kind of brought up, whether by others or whether even by staff. We just kind of wanted to walk through them just to kind of give, again, further kind of sense of scale. These are not the way the commission can determine these things. They have to meet the findings, but these are things that at least kind of can maybe be useful for the commission. It really came down to three that we could at least think of, and if there are others that would be useful that you would like us to look at, we can do that. Historic comparisons, what has been approved through similar mechanisms by the commission, really what the scale of the proposed improvements in those locations were. Two, looking at existing mechanisms, how those relate to the mechanism we have here with the public realm improvement bonus. And then third, it's come up a number of times thinking about the level of investment and how one should be considering that in relation to the improvement, or the relation to the bonus. So first, the department put together a kind of comparison of the subway bonuses that have been granted by the commission since the bonus was put into effect in '82. There have been a number of projects in a kind of wide variety of floor area grantings. One Vanderbilt, oddly, is not the most when in scale of the types that have been granted. The one that I think when we look at kind of is most closely resembles is 15 Penn Plaza. And one of the things that, even though the FAR number is much different, because the site sizes are themselves much different, one gets a very similar square footage number. In relation to those improvements, that's really a kind of perhaps more acceptable way to compare the projects. And when you look at that information really on the kind of scale of the types of projects that are incorporated into it, one Vanderbilt easily exceeds the level of a number of improvements that are incorporated into the 15 Penn proposal, and admittedly any of the others that were undertaken by the project. So again, this may not be the way you determine it, but it kind of allows the commission to think, is this correct in scale? Right? That's maybe number one.
Doesn't Bear Stearns fit into that?
We incorporate
21.6 from.
So as we incorporated it into this, into the document in itself, but that inclusion of a improvement was only through the landmark transfer. And what they did at the time was the inclusion of a access point from street level to below grade, and fitting out of some of the passageways below. In that, we looked at that, but again, in the scale of this proposal in relation to that, this was much larger.
It's missing an E. It's missing an E. Also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me, I was having a private moment here with my...
Having a nostalgic
Question, so I guess I'm struggling to see an apples-to-apples comparison between
Sure.
them. Have you considered, looking at per FAR unit, how much FAR square footage, so that we can in fact do an apples-to-apples?
Well, I think if you look at the report, we break down every single project into the various elements and
Yes, I
create a language between them because they're very disparate, right? There are special permits that have varieties of types of things, but we tried to group it all in a way that allowed for easier comparison between them. And the realization, I think, on our part was that when you're talking about these numbers, the numbers really are only in relation to the site itself, right? It's the total amount of square footage that's being granted as part of it. You could have a very large bonus on a very small site as opposed to a somewhat small bonus on a very large site, and it'd actually be the same thing. And I think the general idea was that we wanted to give people the ability to look at it in both or multiple ways. But that in total, I think the general assessment from that, and we've had little contradicting of this point, is that when you look at Von Vanderbilt in relation to those other projects and break it down into the variety of types of things it includes, it is more than any of the others. So again, it's kind of information for the commission to think, well, this seems still okay, right? I think that's the real point of this. They have to meet the findings, but this allows you to consider it further.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Young.
Oh, never mind.
Ms. Efron.
I think just to further sell your point, it's the only one, with the exception of maybe 15 Penn Plaza, which is adjacent to the major transportation hub of our city. So it seems like it has a significance into and of to itself.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think many of the others make connections that were important and are useful today, but they're that in the scale of project, it's different. We included this just to I think people were having concerns sometimes about the total number itself. And perhaps is a useful way to think about it in relation to other mechanisms we already have in the text. Right? One of the things is that either the existing subway bonuses, covered pedestrian space, usually are kind of maximum 20% increase. One of the ways to kind of consider this project is in relation to the fact that you're really grouping a number of these things together to get to those FARs. It's not hard to imagine just the on-site work of the Vanderbilt building achieving a subway bonus on its own, forgetting entirely about what it's doing off-site, right? So the idea of kind of one could actually begin to group these things and kind of get to those similar numbers so that it's a way of getting there, right? The improvements as part of the covered pedestrian space or the public plaza or the public place, again, can begin to meet the types of FARs that are normally granted as part of those special permits. And so this is just another way to kind of get at the sense of the scale here.
It's very helpful.
Okay. And then finally, we didn't call it money, we called it level of investment. Like the very wealthy planners don't like to talk about money in relation to these things, but I think one of the things, money has been talked about a lot. And I think one of the things that it's useful to is it begins to give a sense of scale to the project again. One of the reasons that I think there's generally concern about dollars being the way that this is determined is that one could spend a lot of money doing very simple things, right? You could gold case a stair, spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and really had very little improvement value, right? So there's always a kind of, it's not just a dollar figure, it's what the dollars are doing. But even still, I think the information that was provided by the applicant to give a sense of the scale to this and the information that was then verified by the MTA on these numbers, these are not, let's call them insignificant numbers in relation to what was discussed in the past as part of the East Midtown District Improvement Bonus or just in general comparison to other types of transfers or bonus mechanisms, that it's a significant amount of money. So again, it's not the way to determine, but it allows one to kind of check that the things that we're looking at in the findings are sensible in the rest of the world.
Mr. Dweck.
Just to reassure ourselves.
Sure.
We're not requiring them to spend the 210 million, we're just requiring them to do the improvements, which they approximate to be 210 million.
That's correct.
And if they come in under budget, they're free to pocket it and so.
And if they come over budget,
It's their headache.
yes, that's correct.
Right, and actually, that's just a really important point here, because the applicant here also bears the risk.
Right.
The reward, if they can come in below 210, but the risk not only of cost overruns, but more significantly of time overruns. And Ms. Ortiz.
Right, so then whose estimates are these? Are these the MTA's estimates, or what are these numbers?
These were as I understand it, the applicant's estimates based on their construction advisors, but vetted by the MTA, which the MTA has,
Okay.
I believe, sent a letter to us saying, to Edith, saying that they embrace these costs.
That's correct.
Mr. Cantor.
Would we know if that includes the MTA's costs for their trackmen and flagmen and everything else? Or are they going to impose that upon the applicant?
It's typically with work like this, it's imposed, the work is, or the dollars associated with that are tied to the work of the applicant, so yes.
So that would be in there already? Okay.
Which, again, I mean,
No surprise.
indeed, but again, as we know, and you especially know, given construction with respect to the MTA, that time overruns particularly affect those cost overruns. Ms. Deleuze.
So just to clarify, so both the capital costs of building out the public plaza on Vanderbilt and the ongoing maintenance, are they or are they not included in the $210 million estimate?
I know the number that was provided, these are the numbers that were provided to you all. These are just kind of copied those in. I believe that number, I know that number definitely includes the capital costs. We can confirm whether they also
I do
include
not believe they
maintenance.
include the ongoing maintenance costs.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Efron?
There was a, I hope I have this right, because it was at the end of the hearing, but there was a statement made that there are 5,200 construction jobs and 192 permanent jobs, which I assume are building maintenance. Does the 5,200 jobs include all of the construction below ground as well? It just
Offhand,
it
I
sounds
I
low.
don't.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah,
I don't-
we'll get
I
back to
just
you.
don't know. Be included in the DEIS, but we'll get
Oh,
back to you.
okay. If it's there, I don't bother.
Mr. Dwyer?
A question, and it might not be related to this commission, but mentioning the full-time employment. Do you know if this project has gone in front of the, if they plan on going in front of the IDA, if they're going to be doing some kind of pilot or payment in lieu of taxes or other benefits taking advantage?
I'm not aware. I don't,
To the best of our knowledge, the answer to that is no.
It's too
Yeah.
big.
And that the building will pay full real estate taxes, which I believe has been estimated at approximately $50 million a year.
Thank you.
Plus the economic impact of the new jobs.
anything else?
Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I think we wanted to go through this kind of in somewhat belabored form because I think we wanted to get a sense of where the kind of concerns the commission. It's a very large project with a lot of pieces, and really to get a sense of what those pieces are that really kind of require perhaps additional work, whether that be in the text or whether that be in the specifics of the proposal. I think we got some fair feedback on the text itself about above grade. As in addition, the proposal itself, when it speaks to access between Vanderbilt and the Transit Hall. So,
Ms. Young?
So, we haven't really talked about this at all today, and certainly there's enough to chew on here. But I was wondering, has the text around the sustainability piece changed at all?
yeah, so in one of the things that the text had, there were two changes that we spoke about at the last session. Number one, the original text talked about that the proposal shall be in keeping, I think is the word, with best practices for sustainable design, and we've changed that to meet or exceed, so that the applicant, that intent that the application be demonstrating greater than, not just be in keeping with. That was a change requested by the borough president. And then second, that the proposed, when one demonstrates what the building is doing, it's be in relation to the then current New York City Energy Code. The text assumed the 2011 code, which is currently in place. This is a text that has a long life, and so that we wanted to make sure that when you're doing a proposal in 2020, you're then using the correct code. So those changes, and then the applicant, based on the bit of conversation we had 2 weeks ago on this, the applicant provided additional materials to you all regarding how the building is complying or attempting to comply with LEED standards. And additionally, a letter from Urban Green Council talking about the building in relation to those standards.
I guess this is sort of it's sort of a perspective or even sort of a philosophical issue in a way. But I mean, I think that, as a city, we have a very aggressive climate change goal. And I think that, it seems like one of the things that we as a city, again, would have to do to be able to meet those aggressive climate change goals is to actually be really aggressive at some point when you actually have the opportunity. And, when in looking at the building stock, there's the amount of improvement you can get out of the existing building stock is limited by, sort of the natural cycle of reinvestment in existing buildings. And so I guess, I'm just wondering whether even that language of, meets or exceeds is really sort of, if you're looking at some of these, really iconic projects that are, going to be big deal, sort of, front of magazine-type projects, whether even that language is a little conservative in relationship to sort of the climate change goals that we have generally for the city. Because, I mean, and again, like, you know, again, the intent of this is to deliver the transit benefits, but, you know, there's also, you know, there are other, I don't want to say competing, but there are sort of overlaying policy goals here, and I wonder about that a little bit.
Well, I think
And not to say that One Vanderbilt isn't doing everything that it can, but in the language of the text, right? Because meet or exceed is like, well, you know,
I think
meet or exceed.
Well, I would say just as a.
Well, but that language gives us, as a commission, the platform from which to push an individual applicant on an individual project. So I think if we require people to either meet or exceed, then it's our discretion. We have what we need in order to be as aggressive as you want us to be, and I agree that we should be.
I think the other thing is that one of the things that was kind of noted to us by people as we were thinking about this text in relation to what we had done in the past was there's a lot of different ways a building can be sustainable. And what the meet or exceed language really talks about, imagine a scenario where 20 of the ways it is exceeding best practices, and then for one way it is just meeting. And if the text only said exceeds best practices, it doesn't allow the flexibility to kind of say, well, okay, this is a little bit, but this one is in fact all large. And it allows, again, to the point of the discretion, it allows the commission to weigh all of those features together. I think the other thing just on this is that from the hearing, I think there was a lot of discussion about the topic of sustainability and how the building should, what types of things the building could do or how the building should relate to those things. I think the applicants attempted to kind of demonstrate how they are doing those things and what are the kind of constraints and issues they're facing as building the building.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other, maybe part of the other thing that here is a little difficult, right, is that, again, when I think about it, I'm thinking about it in relationship to the 80 by 50 goal, right? And I think there's a sense amongst the geeks that getting to 80 by 50 isn't going to happen with our current best, like meeting or exceeding our current best practice generally, that we need like some really, there are going to have to be some leaps involved, right? And I'm wondering whether, you know, maybe this isn't the right proceeding to think about this in, but just sort of more generally looking forward, whether there are ways to relate the language to whatever climate change goal happens to be the city's goal at the time, as opposed to sort of being like whatever, you know, like best practice, you know, suggests like off-the-shelf technology and off-the-shelf, you know, stuff that we can do today, right? As opposed to sort of like we're actually looking, it's, you know, we're looking someplace with a goal in mind. So maybe we should be relating the, you know, whatever it is that the language that we're putting down to like to that goal that we're heading toward, as opposed to like the things that we know how to do today. Just, you know, thoughts.
Mr. Cantor.
Sort of speaking to what was just discussed, at the public hearing, one, if not more, of the speakers made reference to alternate locations for improvements where trading a stair for this, that. Did we do any looking at that? Did we do any follow-up on that?
So I believe there were two general discussions of that. One was concerns about the mobile passage stair and the location on the sidewalk. And that, I think we talked about at the last review session, that the issue there is that the stair itself, the building that's right next to that stair is the Landmark Mobile Building, and bringing that stair inboard is quite a difficult process. But then even more importantly, given the width of 42nd Street sidewalk, that it wasn't an issue to have the stair at that location on the street. Then I think one of the, and this actually speaks to some of the materials the commission received this morning, there was some discussion of different types of improvements, particularly on the One Vanderbilt site itself. And I think at the last review session we spoke about that there were at least some issues that were raised through that the applicant had kind of demonstrated that there were concerns and kind of difficulties of actually undertaking the improvements that were described there. And the additional materials that we received today really kind of goes specifically into what the issues are, and why I think the improvements that the MTA has signed off on in relation to the proposal are not only significant, but actually feasible. Does that?
Any other questions for Frank? You'll have one more shot at Frank and Edith on March 16th. This is obviously an extremely important and complex undertaking, so we want all of you to be as conversant with it as possible. And thank you for your attention and your really thoughtful comments. So,
Good. All right.
see you in 2 weeks,
See you in
Frank.
2 weeks.
So Commissioners, this Wednesday, March 4th, staff have prepared favorable resolutions for the following: series of special natural area authorizations to facilitate expansions to the Riverdale Country School River Campus Parking Building, as well as the Riverdale Country School Hill Campus Noctatorium Building, and the SAR Academy. We also have the 180 Orchard Street Public Parking Garage, which is a special permit to facilitate public parking. 505, 513 West 43rd Street, special permits and text amendment to facilitate residential development, including affordable housing within the special Clinton area district. And we have 13761 Northern Boulevard, which involves a zoning map amendment in Corona, Queens, to facilitate a hotel. So that's on our agenda for this Wednesday. March 18th, we have the stairwells text amendment, which, as you know, is a Department of City Planning initiated text amendment to ensure additional safety measures in tall commercial buildings, selected zoning districts. We have 3941 West 23rd Street. We're still awaiting additional information from the applicant, which we have not yet received. We do expect to hear an update a little later on this week, so we'll bring this back on March 18th. The vote will likely occur thereafter. And we have 2702 West 15th Street, which is a special permit to facilitate a commercial building in the special Coney Island mixed-use district. Corinza is here, and she's going to walk us through a letter from the applicant responding to some of the concerns that were raised at the letter.
Before we go there, can I just?
Sure.
I just want to say that I appreciate the efforts made on the 43rd Street project to increase the number of inclusionary units.
Yes, and I thank you, and I thank both the applicant and community board for working on that. I think there is a degree of disappointment that the agreement between the community board and the applicant to reduce the requested height by 10 feet resulted in such a significant loss of units. But on the other hand, do recognize that the ultimate height of that agreement increases the prior approved height on this transitional block by 20 feet. So I do think we wanted to recognize the community board and the applicant working together on this difficult issue. So.
Good afternoon. This is a post-hearing follow-up. In your briefing package, there is a memo from the applicant addressing two outstanding issues from the hearing on earlier in February. And the first point was the need for the waiver of the open yard. And in response to that, the applicant has provided two exhibits in the memo demonstrating the need for this open space. And in the first one, you can see that the small section that needs to be waived would create a very irregular building footprint, and thus would be kind of an odd configuration and not feasible for construction. And in Exhibit B, you can see that if they did comply with the open yard requirements, as well as created a more normal floor plan, it would greatly reduce the amount of floor area available for the building. And another point that the applicant makes is that this is an irregular triangular lot, and that, which provides some difficulty creating a open space for the open storage warehouse, and that the necessity to have the elevator in the shallower portion of the triangular lot would create this open space, and thus justifying the need for this waiver of the open space. He also, the applicant also addresses the question about the blank facades and any kind of potential for graffiti, as there's some graffiti in this area. The applicant and the owner have agreed to install a fence to create the more privacy for the off-site parking spaces. And they also have agreed that if there's any graffiti on the building at any point, they will remove it as quickly as possible. And those are the issues that are addressed here.
Any questions for Corinne? Thanks.
You're welcome.
And last but not least, we have the Cherry Hill Gourmet proposal. This is a text amendment to facilitate the continued use in the existing food store in this special district. He's here to walk us through some of the research he's conducted to begin to address some of the applicants, community boards, borough presidents, commissions.
Good afternoon, Chairman Weisbrod, Commissioners. There will be some additional information forthcoming in your package this Friday, rebuttal letter from the applicant, which was received late on Friday. So there'll be an additional opportunity to ask questions about the chain of ownership, as well as some of the legal proceedings that are amongst the parties. There were some questions, though, that I can answer regarding what happened at the Buildings Department with this application. What ultimately happened was the project was applied for as a Directive 14 application, which allows the applicant, in this case an engineer, to self-certify the application back in September of 2007. In the description of the applicant said that there were non-bearing partitions creating a retailed food establishment with a restaurant on the premises, new plumbing work and mechanical work, although he did say no change in use, egress, or occupancy. So while the applicant clearly identified the use as a food store, did not wholly identify the change of use and the potential for a new certificate of occupancy. On that basis, the permits were issued for mechanical, HVAC, and GC the following day. Sometime later in April of 2008, a plumbing permit was issued. The community is particularly vigilant. They called the Buildings Department. There were several inspections that were done, multiple violations and stop work orders, which ultimately resulted in a use violation being issued in March of 2010. So ultimately, the applicant did cure a variety of violations. Either they were dismissed or they were settled in some shape or form, including landmarks issues. And what currently remains is the use violation that they're here for, the change in the special district tax regulations. Community Board, in response to questions about a quorum being present at Community Board 15, last week, on February 24th, they had a re-vote to reaffirm their position on the application. This resulted in a vote which 24, 5 opposed and 2 abstentions. They felt that since there were questions about not having the appropriate quorum, that they would re-vote the application. So they then sent a letter to the council member to that effect also, since he had raised that initial question. The borough president also raised an issue about special permit as a potential alternative. A special permit to this application would be out of scope, as a new application would have to be prepared. There would be findings to that application. The applicant would also have to apply for that special permit. There is also an existing special permit for landmarks under Section 74-711, which allows for a change of use provided certain findings are met, that the applicant agrees to do restorative work under a continuing maintenance program, and essentially approved by landmarks, and has minimal effects on the surrounding uses. I went back and checked my records when they initially applied for this application. We offered that as a potential alternative to the applicant. They chose to proceed with the text change. So it was something we did bring up at that time.
May I ask about?
Yes, Ms. Delus.
At the time that that was offered, what legal counsel did they have? Because that seems to be part of the issue.
That was the current applicant, Richard Lobel.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
He was apprised of that potential alternative.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Efron?
Is it typical for a subtenant to have the right to maintain the landmark exterior of a building? I mean, could they even agree to that? Do we know if that was possible within their lease?
It would require the cooperation of the building owner
Yeah.
to enter into that agreement. I know there's there's complicated ownership. There's an owner, a tenant, and then a subtenant. I guess the special permit requires the owner to participate in that. I guess it wouldn't, in this particular instance, it would be that much more complicated. I'm not certain how that would play
Well, I'm
out.
just wondering, perhaps rather than just
Well,
making assumptions.
it's an agreement to maintain the fee, which would require the owner's involvement and consent at the very least, regardless of which party among the owner, the tenant, and the subtenant actually agreed to do the work. I just would think it was untenable for the subtenant alone to enter into a maintenance agreement to satisfy the landmark special permit without the owner's permission, cooperation, and the like.
Right,
and-
that's,
and
I'm
involvement. Yeah.
agreeing, and that sounds complicated for them.
Mr. Cantor?
So I really heard two things out of me that were interesting. Number one, local law 14 was employed by an engineer, not an architect, which is kind of unusual for an architectural change. Number two, with regard to the time involved in coming back for a new permit, they've been in violation for 5 years. I have very little sympathy for them if they have to spend another year coming back for a special permit.
Okay, well, it indeed was an engineer. The engineer is the applicant of record for the Directive 14. I think you heard testimony, there were...
I believe it was a rhetorical question.
Okay.
Ms. Besser?
Thank you, Chair. So, as Commissioner Cantor mentioned, that they were in violation for approximately 5 years, but how long has it taken for them to go through this process?
Well, if you remember from the testimony, they initially entered into the lease agreement. It's a 20-year lease, incidentally, that they signed in 2007, so they have through 2027. They opened the store in 2009. Again, the use violation was issued in 2010, and I think you heard testimony that there were various attorneys, various litigation. There were a lot of starts and stops in the Brooklyn office. It wasn't until approximately a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that they came forward seriously with this new applicant and started to respond to our requests for a complete application and conducted their environmental review. And we've gotten to this point through the public review process.
Ms. Levin?
First, Richard, had you finished your presentation? I think we
More or
jumped
less, I mean,
into a bunch of...
The chairman also asked questions about the existing occupancy, and there are 2 other restaurants. I could go through that now if you like.
Yeah, because I had some questions about that, and I do have a question about the DOB process, but why don't you want to finish everything you had to tell us before we start picking at you?
This is the floor plan of the ground floor. This is Emmons Avenue. This is Ocean Avenue. Cherry Hill occupies 14,230 square feet on the ground floor. That's primarily the retail store. Adjacent to them is the Masal Cafe, which is a Turkish restaurant. It's some 3,800 square feet. They've been at that location for 13 years. They were, after Hurricane Sandy, it took them 2 years to restore the restaurant to reopen. They're not unhappy with the adjacent tenant. They say that in the summertime, he's open 24 hours, that he brings a high-level clientele, and they coexist with him. For someone who's a competitor, they both sell food. He had only good things to say about the adjacent tenant. Momoyama is an hibachi Japanese restaurant. It's been at the location since 1996, some 19 years. They occupy 4,100 square feet. They were out of commission for 11 months after Hurricane Sandy. During that period of time, they had to pay rent, as did the Masal Cafe. They said business has been not very good over this last 2 years. They're trying to recoup their losses after the hurricane. And they say they don't really have much communication at all with Cherry Hill or didn't really take a position on Cherry Hill. There also is a new restaurant that's going to be opening, some 2,700 square feet. It's also a Turkish restaurant, but they seem to think they serve a different type of meal, different food. It's a different kind of establishment. They currently are renovating, but are not through the buildings department process, are not open. On the second floor of the building are several vacant spaces. Overall, there are 50,000 square feet in the building. Cherry Hill occupies 20,646 square feet, some 14,230 on the ground floor. This is the area that has the restaurant seating area, as well as some office space, some 6,400 square feet. There's some 8,800 square feet of vacant space. This is primarily this area, 5,500 square feet. This area here, 2,500 square feet, a smaller 707 square foot area. There are currently attorneys in this space. There also is a dentist's office here, and some sort of dispatcher for ambulance at this location. So again, overall, 8,800 square feet of the 50,000 is vacant, and that's the tenancy and generally their history. I'll be happy to answer other questions, I guess.
Okay, Ms. Levin.
So Richard, I have a question about the DOB process. So we understand that they self-certified and got original permits, but then sounds like the community was all over them right away. So it must have been obvious from the plans that what they were building was not a restaurant. How
Yes.
is it that DOB let the work continue when, if you looked closely at the plans, they were building a food store?
My understanding, as recently as today, I spoke to counsel at DOB, trying to get some of those very same answers, was that the Department of Buildings was trying to work with the applicant to try to establish what was really the primary use, the accessory use, and whether he could work through a plan which would be conforming. But ultimately, upon inspection, they found that it was operating as a food store, and they issued the use violation.
The whole idea of self-certification is to not have the building department review.
But the buildings department did get into it as,
Subsequently.
correct, but before the thing was built.
But when, no.
Before it was
No,
finished.
no,
process of-
one at a time, so, okay. go
Before it
ahead.
was finished.
Before it was finished.
In the process of construction, yes, complaints were made right away by the local community board, elected officials, they did inspections.
Right.
But they initially did, what the council said to me this morning was they were wrestling with what was accessory, what was the primary use, and encouraged him, they recognized that food use was not an appropriate use, and tried to get him to, he was trying to get him to commit to doing what was the conforming use, but ultimately they did not, and they went ahead and issued the use violation.
Okay, so it sounds like a degree of obfuscation probably went on throughout the process with
It appears that way.
DOB was focused on this issue when they were dealing with the stop work.
Yes, initially,
Situation.
it was filed under Directive 14. It appears that it wasn't really reviewed accurately. If it really was reviewed accurately, the minimum review they're supposed to do under Directive 14, I reviewed this morning, is they're supposed to look at use and occupancy and egress. And apparently that wasn't done to a large degree. Maybe it's because of the uniqueness of this particular special district and the special rules there are that regarding retail activity. I can't say exactly. Ultimately, they did see that there was an issue here with use. They issued the appropriate use violation, and ultimately they did comply and pay fines and had other penalties dismissed. It appears that there are potentially other parts of the building that still are not in compliance, but as far as his work was concerned, he corrected the landmark issues and the construction issues, and the use violation is what remains.
Okay. Well, for me at least, in considering this application, it's sort of threading your way through all of that that's very important, because it's one, we have had applications where it's the Department of Buildings that has made a mistake and issued, where the applicant has been straightforward about what they're planning to do. DOB issued building permits based on a clear representation by the applicant of what they were intending to do, and then it turns out DOB was wrong. We've been pretty sympathetic to applicants trying to correct those kinds of situations. This one, we have claims that the applicant, it's unclear how forthcoming the applicant was with DOB about their plans, and we have the community, I think, properly insisting that rules are on the books and need to be complied with. So at what point, this is clearly a food store. This is not a restaurant. It's a food store.
Richard, how long after the Directive 14 filing was made and the building permit issued was the stop work order issued on the use permit grounds?
The initial application was approved September 2007, and the use violation was not issued until March 4th, 2010.
Okay, thanks.
After it was open.
First, Mr. Cantor, and then Ms. Efron.
Local Law 14 was created 25 years ago, I think, by the building commissioner, Joel Mealy. The intent behind it was to accelerate the process because all of us were getting bogged down. Whether it's a two-story building or a 52-story building, I could go in, turn in my structural drawings, say I did everything according to the law, and my phase of the job will be signed off. The building department reserves the right to do random testing or random investigation as to the appropriateness of the filing. But the building department basically accepts what I say. I'm turning in a mound of drawings that's an inch or 2 or 3 thick. They're not really geared to review those kinds of presentations. And that's what 14 is supposed to do. Now, I find it, again, interesting that, by the way, the law is, I could file mechanical drawings even though I call myself a structural engineer. I could file certain architectural drawings if I call myself an engineer. So you're within the law of doing it, but it's interesting that this is filed by an engineer as a local law 14 when apparently there was a significant amount of architectural change involved. So to blame the building department for not having picked up on their, quote, error, I think is inappropriate because the building department didn't have to. Yes.
No, I'm not blaming them. I'm trying to understand the chain of examination by DOB.
Okay. Except for someone, I think, was it you, mentioned that I think egress and certain things have to be specifically checked. I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, it's
By the building department. But basically, the 14 is made to expedite the process. The building department is expecting that the applicant is honest and has integrity and does have this checks and balance opportunity. But to blame the building department for it, I think, is totally inappropriate.
So maybe my more precise question should be, when was the first stop work order issued and what was it for?
was my question.
I don't have that information to give you at the moment. We could research it and
But the
find out.
first stop work order on use grounds was 2010.
Correct.
Right. So I'm
Ms.
just trying to
Efron.
get to the question of good faith. So since we know there were multiple stop orders, or at least you've now said there's at least 2, and the community members said that in the hearing, what were they for, if not use?
Various, I'd have to really look, I didn't really look at them specifically. They're various construction, plumbing, mechanical, elevator, various.
I mean, the assumption here, maybe an incorrect assumption, is that complaints were being made constantly, and so the buildings department was going there constantly and finding constantly things that were wrong. But despite the fact that they were going there constantly to find things that were wrong, the one underlying thing that was wrong, they didn't issue a stop work order for 3 years, which that's one thing I just don't understand, so.
They opened it, the store opened in 2009, yeah.
Within 1 year of opening.
I want to say, Mr. Chairman, it was 1 year, right? It was, the store opened in 2009, and they got violated in 2010.
But the permit was.
The permit was issued in 2007.
The permit was issued in 2007, and the permit clearly said a food store. And what percentage was food store, what percentage was restaurant, and, but the plans apparently showed a majority of the space to be used as a food store, even under Directive 14. So I just raise it as a question that 3 years of work, including 1 year of occupancy, went on before, for whatever other stop work orders were issued, no stop work order was issued for that for 3 years. Ms. Ortiz.
A few things. One is that it seems, I just want to clarify. So the engineer submitted drawings that swap the primary and accessory use, or were they described equally? Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the drawings, but the description
Yeah.
is non-bearing partitions creating a retailed food establishment with restaurant on premises.
Which it is.
New plumbing, mechanical works, no change in use,
Okay.
egress, or occupancy.
So
So
I
it's
mean-
implying a food store.
Yeah, and the
as a
retail
primary
is
use.
coming first. Who knows?
And that's what it is.
And so it's unclear, and perhaps the discussion about how, as you said, DOB was trying to help them work through, well, what's primary, what's accessory use. It's not even described in that language.
You're correct. It implies that it's a food store primarily. Yes.
Yeah, and then, the other, it seems like they were given advice at some point to choose what seems like a more ornery path to address this issue over, ULURP over a special permit. And that just strikes me as very strange, why they would go that route.
Well, the special permit does require like a continuing maintenance program and approval by landmarks, and I guess that's a
That seemed to be-
long-term undertaking and expense that the applicant inferred that he didn't want to take on. I mean, we did present it to him.
Yeah. And then, the third thing, and I'm just really struggling with this because, I feel like I could work through some of the earlier issues perhaps, but, something that is outside of our bailiwick in some way, but, is the impact of the closure on other businesses. I do believe that the other businesses would be impacted because this seems to be a destination driver. This seems to be the thing that people are going to, and other businesses are benefiting from the, the customers that are going here. So it's not just the closure of this business. It's potentially, and you mentioned these other businesses are already struggling a little bit or continue to struggle, potentially the closure of other businesses on the street. I don't know how to reconcile that, but it's just something I feel like bears mentioning.
Ms. Ortiz, Ms. Deluz.
So obviously, there's I think there are good points on both sides
Yeah.
in this particular, in these complicated circumstances for this one particular store. We definitely heard testimony that increasing the size of the restaurant seemed to be something that wasn't all that viable from the folks at Cherry Hill. I'm just wondering to what extent that statement is something that we're trying to test as a possibility of requesting that one of the ways to deal with this is for them to increase their restaurant square footage.
Well, my recollection of the testimony was they felt that they couldn't support an increased size restaurant, or they couldn't support becoming a conforming use. I'm not sure what else to say about that.
On the marketing that's going on for the existing vacant spaces, how is it being marketed?
We'd have to find that out from the applicant.
That might be one way to.
Mr. Dweck.
I would just comment that based on Richard's scouting of the other two restaurants, that they said they're not doing that well.
Well, particularly the Japanese restaurant that was closed for 11 months, and he said that a lot of people, he was closed 11 months, even though he's open for 16 months now, a lot of people still think he's closed, and he paid a lot of rent during that period of time. He paid rent all that time he was closed. So he's trying to recoup that loss, and plus being closed that amount of time, he lost clientele. So he's hurting. The other guy, he was busy on a Friday afternoon. He didn't complain about his business, just that he was closed 2 months, and he said that Cherry Hill, in fact, helps his business because it is open. There are a lot of improvements done next door to the building. He attracts a certain clientele, and they shop there, and so on and so forth.
Mr. Cirillo.
You know, this is really more of a reflection than a question. I feel like this is such a confusing and difficult circumstance to kind of explain, because there's a little bit of, I mean, there's enough wrong to be spread around, and there's enough possibility for, I don't know, where we can all give a little and think about it. And I'm not sure that in doing it that way, we ever get to a really good answer. And I'm not sure what our ability to analyze this includes, or if there's something our scope is very limited. But it's almost as if, based on the facts of this particular case, we almost have to step back and just look at it as if it were coming to us for the very first time with an applicant who hasn't yet moved in, if we deem the use appropriate or not. Because the circumstances on how they got there are troubling. You know, we could argue all the points about, what they knew and what they filed, and the government was aware, and yet things happened, and then they found out 5 years ago they shouldn't be doing this. Let's say maybe they knew earlier than that, but we know at least the violation was issued 5 years ago, and they continue to operate, which, we've shut parking garages down for operating for 6 months that way, and yet, so I think we can keep getting mired in this situation, when maybe the way we should be analyzing it is just based on whether or not we deem as planners that this type of business makes sense here or not. And it either is a yes or a no, or we're all in different corners of that issue too. But in trying to figure out how we tilt the scale on where the blame goes and whether or not there's good actors and bad actors in this, I don't know that we'll ever really be able to get ourselves out from under this one. So that's just my reflection. I'm not even sure, I just know from the history and the people who testified, and I know how the community feels about this, so I'm not trying to go in either direction. But the reality is, if you really look at what's happening here and on this block and what's happening and the general sense of some of the community versus others of the, this doesn't look like it's such a bad use. It doesn't look like it's turned the neighborhood upside down. There are other sections in the letters, A, B, C, D, and E. This could happen in all these other places, but not right here. So maybe we should be looking at this bigger and let the regulatory agencies deal with, I know we are partially, we help build the regulation, but maybe this is just one we take the step back from and then look at this and say, does this make sense today in 2015, based on the neighborhood and based on what else exists? If we were starting from scratch, would we think this was a permissible use and deal with it like that? I don't know if we're able to do that, but that's how sort of the only way I could possibly get to an answer on this for myself.
Yay.
Ms. Efron?
I'll go with it, Fred. And what's interesting is that some of the other uses permitted in the district, which was 1973, are donut shop, ice cream shop. Granted, they're smaller than 3,500 square feet, but they are all the components, bakery, all the components that make up a specialty food store the way this one is constructed. So, if it were coming fresh, if that is within our jurisdiction, and quite frankly, I have no idea if it is, it does seem like it is accomplishing the same use, which is to draw people in a waterfront community to a location to purchase and eat food. The catering business may be questionable in that, but the fact that there is that ability to buy quality food of differing types under one roof seems consistent, especially if you break down the components into 3,500 square foot pieces, as you probably could within an appetizer and specialty food store. So it seems appealing in that regard.
And there's
I think
something
the use
about
of the restaurant actually undermines what is going on there, because there's no opportunity for people to take the food and sit anywhere, which would be, if you were starting from scratch, probably a really appealing aspect of.
I'd say with the exception, in the summertime, they do a set of tables outside.
Right, I mean, there's still the restaurant there.
And it adds to the, the vitality on the street, and the restaurant does add
Right.
something.
You
I
could
think.
imagine on the inside, if you were starting from scratch, I'm not saying how they should run their business or even if it's legal, but the idea of having someplace to take those items and eat them would add to the vitality of the neighborhood.
Well, I just want to weigh in so that nobody thinks I'm indifferent.
We would never think that under any set of
Compelling
circumstances.
argument. No, it sounds like, based on, obviously, the testimony you heard and what I've heard from my colleagues about their visit, that.
Just for the record, I believe
Yeah.
Commissioners Levin and Efron did actually go out there.
Those
to
are the
look
colleagues
at it.
I mean, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That this is responsive to the market. But I think our dilemma here, and we see it periodically, is that whether or not we are rewarding bad behavior.
Correct. I know.
And no.
That's the public policy issue
Yeah.
for us then.
We don't want to do that, obviously. And I think that's what makes.
I agree.
What would otherwise be, I think, a very rational assessment as enunciated by Fred. I think that's what, the only thing that gives pause to consideration.
And I don't disagree with that at all.
Mr. Cantor and then Mr. Marin.
One of the problems with sitting next to Fred is he comes up with these rational arguments, and I can't bang them. But if you remember, Ken, about 2 years ago in your borough, we had an applicant coming in here. It seems that he, with the ignorance of the building department, found a way to add a couple of floors to a building.
Right.
And this commission, and he, by the way, he had a second building in with the same game played. Only
Right.
that one was being tied up and not being CO'd.
Right.
And this commission sat and agonized because how can you shut down a building with the homeless?
Right.
We were as concerned about the applicant or what comes behind the applicant as we were about the law. And this guy was as well, I shouldn't say as guilty because I'm not a lawyer, but he didn't have very much to stand on.
But ultimately, Erwin, you're right. Our burden, our concern, we weighted toward the inhabitants of the building. And we
Right.
did not want whatever irregular behavior on the part of the
human
owner
basis-
to unduly and unfairly impact these
On a
innocent
human basis, there's no
inhabitants.
discussion.
Right.
Okay? I mean, the applicant found a way because he appealed to our better human instincts. And now I hear that we're talking about 2 other storekeepers may be involved. Well, I'm not a Republican, but there's a thing called dynamic scoring, okay, where when they cut a tax or raise a tax, it has implications far beyond it. Yes, we may have a dynamic scoring issue with the guy next door, but what's that got to do with his job? In my view, there are indications over here that the burden was on the applicant. The applicant failed to respond to the burden. He had absolute other opportunities, which were both suggested by the department and refused. I find it difficult to be sympathetic toward the applicant, even though the logic of the situation is that the use may be a good use. If he wants to come in with a good use, come in with a good use.
Mr. Marin, and then Ms. Ortiz.
I just wanted to kind of understand a little bit better. You know, we talked about, we've heard from testimony how times have changed. This is a different era, and I agree. We've heard it from our colloquy on the commission discussing the fact that when this district was created, it was something totally different. I happen to agree that it doesn't seem so bad that there is a food type of supermarket, especially supermarket in the area. The way that it arrived is the question. But in light of all this, I think that the department should also take a look at the balance of the areas, because undoubtedly, if the community is saying times have changed, and they have, we have two parent working households where the parents can't really cook and they want to go out and get a good meal for their kids when they get home. We heard that from a testimony from one of the young ladies in the audience. So that's all understandable. And I think that moving forward, if we want to make sure that this area A to H thrives, that we maybe need to revisit it at this point, take a look at some of the decisions that were made, take a look at some of the uses in the neighborhood, the people that have moved into the neighborhood, and make a better informed decision as to how we want this to look, because undoubtedly this is going to pop up again.
Ms. Ortiz, and then, Ms. Ortiz. No.
And I think in addition, allow for further differentiation in use categories, because this is not a conventional grocery store, which we might agree is not appropriate for a place that really needs and is calling to be a destination of sorts. But, I was going to go back to, Commissioner Cantor. I don't know, for me, the facts are not as clear-cut as they seem to be for you, or maybe for others. It does seem to me that even in looking at the facts, I could see an out where there, I offer a benefit of the doubt to, to the engineer who submitted a document that stated, first, we will be a retail store. Second, we will be, a restaurant. And no discussion of percentages was included, and it's hard to say that, what that was an attempt to do, obfuscate the truth. I don't know. He said that first, we will be a retail store. Second, we will be a restaurant. So, and the other is that my understanding of the decision they made versus vis-a-vis special permit versus ULURP is that neither was a great option. And they chose one that maybe we might disagree with, but we can't say the other one was obviously the right way to go, given the complications associated with engaging the owner. So, we're all looking at the facts and interpreting them in different ways. I sort of like where Commissioner Cerullo is going with this, given that we can't come to multiple interpretations and we're all looking at the same set of facts, we have to find another way to consider this application.
Let me suggest. I mean, we have, as Richard said, you're going to be getting some additional material. I think this has been a very interesting discussion. Obviously, we all recognize we cannot be in a position where we are simply rewarding wrongdoing, and at the same time, there are many situations that come before the commission, that have come before the commission just in the past year, where we have used our powers to rectify conditions that were not in accordance with the zoning resolution for the greater good. And so there's still, the facts are still a bit murky. Let's see what the additional material that we receive. We will come back and discuss this in 2 weeks. It should say it is not, as we know, on a ULIP clock, but at the same time, I think it's important to resolve it expeditiously. To me, there is a lawsuit outstanding from the existing owner, and I sort of found it instructive that the lawyer for the owner didn't take a position, refuses to take a position one way or the other on this matter, given the fact that if the owner really wanted this subtenant out, he would certainly have taken a position on this matter. So let's revisit it in 2 weeks. I think that we heard a lot of testimony on both sides of this, and I think the commission itself has expressed a wide range of views on it. So let's come back and see where we stand and see if we can hopefully propose a solution that both achieves all of our ends, if that's at all possible. Any other matter to come before the commission today? Today? Okay. So we'll see you all on Wednesday, and it'll give you all 2 weeks to brood about this decision. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.